Leaders' questions. And could I call on Deputy Billy Kelleher on behalf of Fianna Fáil?
Tanaiste, at the heart of the government's policy in terms of the programme for government are two key issues with regard to health. Was one, the introduction of free GP care for everybody by the end of this government's lifetime, and that universal health insurance will also be established after the next election. Now, by any stretch of the imagination, when you look at the progress to date, it has been very minimal, to say the very least, and that would be polite. But with regard to universal health insurance itself, Tanaiste, we now have a situation where the funding model that's being proposed by the Minister for Health is a form of universal health insurance. And at the same time, we have two key ministers in government, the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, who are cynically undermining that particular proposal. Now, when you look at the proposals brought forward by Minister Riley, he said at the outset, before the last election, that nobody would pay any more than they're paying already with regard to health insurance. Now, clearly that has not happened in the interim, with escalating private health insurance policies, year in, year out, massive increases, forcing families to abandon it at up to 6,500 people per month. Now, we are waiting for the publication of the White Paper, Tanaiste, on universal health insurance. And last Monday, the Minister for Finance was quite robust in undermining the actual principle of universal health insurance, saying that it would expose the state to huge costs and expose the families to huge costs. Coupled with last week's announcement by the leaks from Minister Howland's office, that families will have to pay up to €1,600 for the basic health cover that's been proposed by Minister Riley. So what I'm asking Tanaiste today is, one, do you agree that the panacea that was announced by Minister Riley 3 years ago, that nobody would pay anything more than they're already paying, is now a fallacy, in the sense that people are already paying substantial sums over and above that? And number two, the White Paper itself, when will it be published, so that we can have an informed debate on this issue? We're depending on scraps from leaks, from government, from individual ministers, trying to undermine what is a central core principle with regard to this government in delivery of universal health insurance. So, Minister, would you agree that this should be published immediately, that we should have an informed debate on it? Because quite clearly the document we published last year would indicate that it won't be a utopia if we introduce universal health insurance as proposed by Minister Riley, because simply it will cost an awful lot more than presently people are paying in terms of private health insurance. And also, is Labour happy? Is Labour happy with now giving over health insurance to private companies, these being the ones that will decide whether or not health is rationed and what sort of basic policies will be put in place with regard to cover for ordinary families in this country?
Thank you.
Well, the government is agreed to the introduction of a policy of universal health insurance. That has been the policy of my party for more than a decade. It is something that is coming after a period of Fianna Fáil government when you showed no interest in reforming the unfair two-tier health system that we've had for a long time in this country. And you still don't, of course, which is why you've opposed the government's proposals to give a break to families with the medical care for their children. This government believes that people should be treated based on medical need, not on the amount of money that they have in their pockets, and that people that get sick know that they can get treated in good time. We also want to change the incentives to the health system so that the majority of people get treated in their communities and don't end up unnecessarily in A&E or in a hospital bed. And that makes sense when it comes to keeping people healthy, and it makes sense when it comes to spending the taxpayers' money in a way that is most effective. That's why, for example, the government has put an emphasis on putting in place the building blocks for a universal health insurance system. It's why we decided to lower the cost of accessing primary care for people, starting with the introduction of free GP visits for children aged 5 and under. And it's also why we're building up the primary care system. Now, the introduction of universal health insurance is a major reform project. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's important that we get it right. And we're not rushing it. There's a lot of preparatory work that has to be done. The White Paper is part of that. It will be the basis for the consultation including what should be included in the guaranteed basket of services. Other preparatory work is also going on, such as the introduction of Money Follows the Patient across the public hospital system and free GP care for children under 5 and under. Regarding cost, as I've said, we have to proceed cautiously. We want a more efficient health system that delivers better value for taxpayers, and we also need to keep health insurance affordable. We're at an early stage in this. The Department of Public Expenditure and Reform and the Department of Finance, as you would expect them to do, are doing their job, which is to probe the costings and to maintain an oversight of policy in terms of its cost implications at an early stage. We want, over time, to reform the health service so that it treats people as early as possible, as efficiently as possible, and to do that we want to keep health costs affordable for families and for the taxpayer. The alternative, of course, is the Fianna Fáil alternative, which is to do nothing and to allow it drift. That's not acceptable to us. The white paper is being prepared. It will be published in the not-too-distant future, and it will provide an opportunity then for all of us to have an input into the discussion on where universal health insurance, how it's progressed.
Thank you. Deputy Kelleher, 1 minute. Thank you.
Party may have been proposing a universal health insurance model, but it certainly was on a funding system of social insurance as opposed to private insurance companies being the ones that would be funding the health model, Tanaiste, and there's quite a large difference between the two. At the outset, Tanaiste, you said that you want to introduce a policy that would give access to people based on their medical need as opposed to their ability to pay. Now, in the last couple of months, you've decided to announce free GP care for those of 6 and under. But at the same time, you're funding that particular initiative by taking medical cards off the sickest in our society, Tanaiste. So the idea that you come in here and say that you want to ensure that people will access treatments based on their need simply isn't even credible when you look at what you have done with regard to discretionary medical cards, week in, week out, withdrawing them from the sickest and the most vulnerable in our society. So, Tanaiste, would you accept at this stage that after 3 years, we now have a situation where the Minister for Health has been completely isolated in government. We have the Minister for Finance who consistently, by his policies, undermines the basic principle of universal health insurance.
Thank you, Deputy.
And that's having a dynamic private health insurance market where people can afford private health insurance. Every policy that the Minister for Finance has brought in this House has undermined that basic principle. Reductions in capping in tax relief, and now further threat to remove tax relief altogether from hard-pressed families. Now, the point I'm trying to make, Tanaiste, is you're talking about a universal health insurance model whereby it will be health insurance companies will be the ones that will actually fund the system through people taking out health insurance. And by any stretch of the imagination, and looking at it coldly and clinically, you're undermining that basic principle day in, day out by the policies that you pursued for the last 3 years. So finally, when will the white paper be published? And will it have detail and costings? Because the public out there want to know whether or not Minister Howlin is scaremongering or telling the truth with regard to €1,600 per person with regard to universal health insurance costs.
Tanaiste.
1,600. Well, first of all, let me correct a number of issues of fact. First of all, the Labour Party position on universal health insurance, which was initially published in 2001, provided for and proposed that there should be a number of health insurers which would be part of the universal health insurance, one of which would be a public service provider. That was and is the position of the Labour Party in relation to universal health insurance. Secondly, with regard to medical cards, you're also wrong. This government is providing 500,000 more medical cards to people in this country than you did when you were in government. Thirdly, you are continuing. You are continuing. In fact, it's more. It's 500. It's 500
of shouting down people. Would you please allow me reply to Deputy Kelleher? Thank you.
590,000. There are now 590,000. There are now 590,000 more medical cards in the system than there were when Fianna Fáil were in government. That is a fact. In relation to your position, and you're still opposing, and I can't understand why Fianna Fáil continues to oppose the government's plan to provide free GP care for children under 6. It is something that will take pressure off families, and it is also an essential building block. It's an essential building block. It's an essential building block for the introduction of a universal health insurance system. And in relation to the introduction of universal health insurance, as I said, it's not something that can be done overnight. It is something. It was not. And again, you don't
stay quiet.
You know, you should at least, Deputy Kelleher, inform yourself. Do a little bit of research. Do a little bit of research before you come in here. It was not promised. It was never intended to be introduced overnight. It is something that requires careful consideration. That is why there is going to be a white paper. The white paper will be published when it is ready. I don't expect that will be very far into the future, and then you will have an opportunity. You'll have an opportunity, Deputy Kelleher, to condemn it and to criticise it, as inevitably you will do.
Thank you. Deputy Jonathan O'Brien, on behalf of Sinn Féin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, since mid-December, the state has been battered by a series of very devastating storms. And the hardship, the destruction and the devastation has been outlined in a series of debates we've had in here. And I know also, Taoiseach, that yourself and various ministers have visited those communities which are affected, so we're very aware.
Sorry, would you allow Deputy O'Brien, please, without noise in the background? Thank you.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, thanks to the work of local authorities and local communities with the assistance of government funding, many of those areas are now starting to get back on their feet. However, Taoiseach, it will be a long journey for a lot of people. Some people may never get the opportunity to reopen their business, Taoiseach, because of the devastation which has been caused and the fact that they were unable to get insurance from previous sets of flooding, Taoiseach. And some areas are living in a constant state of readiness, waiting for the next event of flooding to happen. My own city of Cork and your county of Cork, which Minister Hayes visited very quickly after the last set of flooding, was devastated to unprecedented levels within the city centre, Taoiseach. And at the time there was 3 issues which we needed to deal with. The first was the immediate assistance which needed to be provided to homeowners and business owners, and that phase has now concluded, or at least very well advanced. The second one was in relation to business owners and homeowners who were unable to get insurance, and I know Minister Hayes is working hard on that issue with the insurance companies, trying to get a memorandum of understanding, and you might give us an update on that. And the third phase, Minister, which was outlined by the government, was investing in flood defences in the longer term. And you stated at the time that there was about 250 million would be invested over the next 5 years. Now I think, Minister, we all know that that's not going to be enough to meet the challenges facing the state. In my own city of Cork, we're estimating about 100 million would be needed to put in place the flood defences. So, Minister, the question I want to ask is in relation to EU assistance. I know that the EU Solidarity Fund is only available for the assistance in the immediate aftermath of flooding and won't help with capital projects. And I know that the bar has been set very high. It's estimated that the amount of flooding damage and devastation would have to be in the region of 700 million for us to be able to apply for that. But Minister, you did state on the 20th of February that you were in discussions, your own department and the Department of Public Expenditure were in discussions with the EU Commission about the possibility of getting EU assistance in terms of funding to help alleviate flooding. And I'm just wondering, Minister, if you can give us an update on that, on those discussions. Are they still ongoing or have they concluded, and what was the outcome? And the second one is just in relation to an update. Minister Hayes might be able to inform you on the discussions with the insurance industry, Minister, or Taoiseach.
Taoiseach.
Ceann Comhairle, well, first of all, I want to agree with Deputy O'Brien that I think that families and households who've been affected by the flooding, it is a devastating experience for residential homes, for businesses, and it is something that will take a very long time to recover from. I want to also put on record my own appreciation and the appreciation of the government of all of those who work so hard to help people out in the immediate aftermath of the flooding. people in the utility companies, local employees of local authorities, public servants, and indeed the voluntary effort that was contributed by people at a local level. And indeed I saw this very recently myself when I visited Limerick and saw the impact of the flooding there, and indeed the work that people in the community did to help people out. May I also put on record my tribute to the late Michael O'Riordan, who lost his life in helping people getting their electricity power restored. As you know, the government response to the flood crisis was first of all to make funding available for the immediate issues. That was done through the Minister for Social Protection. Secondly, we've provided 70 million to deal with the aftermath of the flood, mainly in infrastructural works and so on. And the local authorities are making, and many of them have made their submissions now to the Minister for the Environment, who's considering those. And the third dimension of it, which you mentioned, is the issue of flood defences. Now, you've asked me two particular questions. One is the issue of where we're going on the European front. We're still in discussions with the Commission in relation to the issue of what assistance can be provided for from European funding for flood relief. I have to say, though, that the threshold is very high, and I think it is unlikely that it will make, if anything, it will make a very significant, I don't believe it will make a significant contribution to the cost that we have to bear on dealing with the flood issue. However, Minister Hayes has been in discussion with the European Investment Bank, particularly in relation to the flood defences issue, and he's making considerable progress in that area. You asked also about the insurance issue, and again, Minister Hayes has been in discussion with the insurance companies, and he expects to be able to complete a memorandum of understanding with the insurance companies within the next 2 months.
Deputy O'Brien.
Thank you, Tanaiste, for your reply. First of all, can I welcome the fact that within 2 months we hope to conclude those discussions with the insurance industry, and I think that will come as a relief if we can get a positive outcome, certainly for those businesses and homeowners who unfortunately, through no fault of their own, find themselves unable to get insurance now. And I think that would be a very welcome development, and I want to wish Minister Hayes the best of luck with that. In relation to the discussions with the European Investment Bank, is that for flood relief assistance, or are we looking at discussions in relation to getting capital funding to help with the flood defences? Tanaiste, you also mentioned the threshold of the bar is set very high in terms of getting assistance from the EU Solidarity Fund. I think from a reply that you gave to a PQ recently, Tanaiste, you said that we would be looking at damages up to around 700 million in order to qualify. Now, Minister, for a state this small, well, at least I would hope we would never see that level of devastation as a result of weather conditions. Therefore, Minister, or Tanaiste, it's very unlikely that we would ever qualify for assistance from the EU Solidarity Fund because of the very high criteria and bar that they have set. So is it a commitment from this government to try and have discussions on the possibility of changing those criteria to try and make them lower, so in the event of future flooding that this state would be able to get some assistance for immediate flood relief? And is that part of the ongoing discussions that you're currently involved with, Minister, with the EU Commission?
Thank you.
Well, first of all, in relation to the discussions with the European Investment Bank, that's in respect of capital works, so it would mainly be for flood defences. As you know, the European Investment Bank are already assisting us with some of the capital programme, some of the education projects, for example, transport projects that we have underway. So we're in discussions with the EIB to see if we can make, if you like, the capital works that are associated with flood defences, if they're amenable to EIB funding. And that obviously would be a way of, you mentioned, for example, your own assessment of how far the 250 million that we have committed to will go to dealing with flood defences. So we're conscious of that, and therefore we're looking at ways in which the EIB can assist us with that. So that's on the capital side. In relation to the EU Solidarity Fund, that operates on the basis of a percentage of GDP, and that's why the threshold, our estimate is that we would have to have damages at the moment of 700 million in order to qualify for that. Now, we are looking at seeing, because when the EU Solidarity Fund was established, it was established on a European-wide basis. And what we're looking at is to see if that can be broken down on a regional basis. In other words, the kind of weather impacts that there are varies from region to region, in which case the threshold might be lower for those of us in this part of Europe. That's one of the discussions that we're having on it. May I say that we are continuing to look at, I mean, obviously, as with any programme and any issue like this, we look to see what we can maximise in terms of drawdown from EU programmes, and we're doing that in this case also. But at the moment, it seems to us that we probably would qualify for very little, if anything, from the EU Solidarity Fund as it is presently constituted, and therefore we're likely to have to bear the cost of this ourselves. But we are looking at, we are in discussions about how the EU Solidarity Fund might be adjusted on a regional basis that would enable us maybe to qualify for funding from it.
Thank you. Deputy Donnelly.
Thanks, Ken Corley. Tanaiste, on Tuesday we heard from the Special Liquidator of IBRC that they had secured a voluntary agreement with the bidders for the Irish nationwide mortgages, that they would voluntarily adhere to the Code of Conduct of Mortgage Arrears. Yesterday, the Special Liquidator appeared before the Finance Committee, and we heard of this voluntary agreement, that there'll be no oversight, there'll be no central bank involvement, there'll be no sanctions, there'll be no recourse to the Financial Ombudsman. And indeed, Tanaiste, we found out that the voluntary agreement isn't even written down. So from the family's perspectives, I think it's fair to say that this voluntary agreement isn't worth the paper that it's not even written on. But Tanaiste, the second issue is that the nationwide mortgage holders want to bid on their own mortgages. Now, they've been refused, and the rationale given by the liquidator and by Minister Noonan is that allowing the mortgage holders to bid for their own mortgages would potentially drive down the total sales price, therefore exposing the state to legal challenge from creditors. The sales process, Tanaiste, is based on a report from PwC. Now, Minister Noonan has refused to release the report, and the Special Liquidator hasn't released it as yet, but we did find out some very useful things from the Special Liquidator about the report yesterday. We know that the report recommended a single course of action, which is the course that's being followed. We know that the report did not evaluate different options in terms of the sales price. And indeed, the liquidator agreed with the Finance Committee, or told the Finance Committee yesterday, Tanaiste, that sales prices of the different scenarios were not provided. In other words, the liquidator has not been provided with advice that says, if you allow the mortgage holders to bid, we think the sales price would be this, and if you don't allow them to bid, we think the sales price would be something else. So, Tanaiste, it's still entirely possible that a sales price could be developed which would allow the families to bid for their own mortgages, which would garner the same sales price or potentially even more than the current process. We have an example in the media today. Let's take one that we know about, which is Duncan Ballantyne. We know, Tanaiste, that Mr. Ballantyne offered the Special Liquidators 97% in the euro for his loans. But the Special Liquidator yesterday sold his loans as part of a tranche to Lone Star for 60% in the euro, thereby getting €55 million less for Mr. Ballantyne's loans than has actually been achieved in yesterday's sale. So, Tanaiste, I think there is still an opportunity here, but time is ticking. The liquidator, based on the information he gave us yesterday, is acting on incomplete advice. Minister Noonan confirmed to me last night in response to a PQ that neither he nor any of his officials have even seen the report that this entire sales process is being based on. So, Tanaiste, can I ask you, do you agree that there is an opportunity here to pause the sales process and for a thorough investigation to be done by Minister Noonan, by his officials, by the Finance Committee, to see if a process can be designed that allows the families to bid and that still returns to the liquidator the same price? I do think, Tanaiste, that we have a very small window of opportunity to do enormous good for the many thousands of families who own these mortgages. Thank you.
Count Corley, well, the Special Liquidators, as I understand it, has reached agreement with the Phase 2 bidders for the IBRC mortgage book. The agreement, I understand, provides that if successful in acquiring the portfolio, the Phase 2 bidders will ensure that the relevant acquired mortgage loans are serviced in accordance with the Central Bank Code of Conduct on Mortgage Arrears. The Special Liquidators appeared before the Finance Committee yesterday and explained their decision. I understand that they were aware of the anxieties of mortgage holders and had noted the concerns expressed in recent weeks by the Minister for Finance and other members of the Oireachtas. I welcome this positive announcement, and I would remind the House that the Government has always been clear that we would ensure that mortgage holders retain the protection of the CCMA. However, as the Government has previously stated, if it becomes evident that the voluntary application of the Code is not delivering the requisite protection for mortgage holders in arrears, Government will bring forward the required legislation. Looking beyond the IBRC loan book sale, as discussed at the Oireachtas Finance Committee, the Department of Finance, the Central Bank and the Attorney-General's Office are examining the applicability of the CCMA to unregulated firms and the need for legislation in this regard. We have continuously stated that we expected any purchaser of the IBRC mortgage portfolio would service them in accordance with the CCMA, and that remains the position. As the Deputy is aware, the sales process is being undertaken and being pursued by the Special Liquidator. It's part of the liquidation. Process. It operates independently under its own legal basis. But as far as the Government is concerned, we are clear in our mind that we want to protect the interests of the mortgage holders in the IBRC. There have been 2 previous sales of loan books, and in both cases the purchasers agreed to the operation of the CCMA, the continued operation of the CCMA. The 2 bidders in this case have given an undertaking that they will follow suit on that. If they don't deliver on that undertaking, as I said, the Government will bring forward whatever legislation is required.
Thank you. Deputy Donnelly.
I can only assume you picked up the wrong piece of paper to read out. I didn't ask you about legislation for the CCMA. I asked you if we can pause the sales process to figure out if a sales process can be devised that allows the families to bid on their own mortgages, that returns the same or greater sales value to the liquidators. Let me give you a quick example from the protest outside Tanaiste. There's a gentleman I spoke to, himself, his wife and his kids live in a home. They owe €220,000. They're in arrears and they're not going to be in a position to pay that money back. The liquidator is going to sell his mortgage at a highly conservative estimate for about €100,000. It could be as little as €50,000. He's going to sell that mortgage for, let's say, €100,000. Now, this man and his wife could refinance at $150,000, but they're not being given the opportunity. So what is likely to happen, and I put this to the liquidator yesterday and he did not disagree, what is likely to happen is one of the 2 final bidders, both of whom are funds from the US who specialise in distressed assets, are going to buy this family's €220,000 mortgage for about €100,000. They will quickly ascertain that he and his wife cannot pay that. They will then ascertain that there is equity in the house, and they will initiate repossession proceedings, and they will evict him, his wife and his children. So that's what's coming for him. My question to you is, on the basis that the liquidator is acting on imperfect information and Minister Noonan hasn't even seen the advice, it is clear to me that a process could be devised that allows this man, his wife and his children and thousands of other families stay in their homes by buying their mortgages back at the same price or even more that those mortgages are about to be sold to international funds that invest in distressed assets. And what I'm asking is, on the basis that what is about to happen is going to cause enormous and unnecessary distress in our country to tens of thousands of men, women and children.
Please, you're way over time.
Can you please examine whether the sales process can be paused so that we can at least try and figure out a process that allows these people to stay in their homes while still returning the same amount or more to the liquidator? Thank you.
Open your eyes.
Honest.
Well, Deputy Donnelly, you're very knowledgeable and you know how liquidations operate. You know how the liquidation process works. And you know too the risks to the taxpayer of an interference by the state in the liquidation process. And it's easy to say, well, let's pause the sale. There are consequences to that, which might arise from actions taken by other creditors, other people involved in the IBRC liquidation process. And you'd have to be very, very careful and very sure that there wouldn't be an exposure to the taxpayer of any such intervention of that kind. Secondly, I don't think this process is not concluded. What we have here, and what the Special Liquidator told the committee, is that there are two bidders that arising from the concerns that have been expressed about the position of the mortgage holders. Those two bidders have given an undertaking that they will comply with the CCMA, as was the case in the sale of two previous loan books that have happened. But the sale process isn't complete. And I think it would be, I don't think it is wise to start to speculate about where the sales process will end up. We don't know. That's a matter for the Special Liquidator. What I have said very clearly is that as far as the government is concerned, that we want to see the mortgage holders protected here. If the purchaser, whoever that may be at the end of the day, does not meet the commitments that we expect and the standards that we expect, then the government is prepared to legislate. And such legislation would apply not just in the case of the IBRC mortgage holders, but in the case of all mortgage holders. In any event, I think it is fair to say that cases that go before the courts, and you mentioned the issue of repossession, a repossession case would have to, in any event, go before the courts, and we know the approach that the courts is taking, and that is that they are expecting that the terms of the CCMA would be applied.
Thank you. That completes leaders' questions for today.